The city breathed in the damp, chill air of a late autumn evening, exhaling it as a mist that clung to the steel and glass canyons. In the labyrinth of alleyways behind the glittering main streets, where the dumpsters overflowed and the fluorescent lights of back doors buzzed a lonely dirge, Elara had carved out her kingdom. Her palace was a recessed doorway, shielded from the worst of the wind by a large industrial air conditioner. Her throne was a stack of worn blankets, and her crown was a woolen beanie pulled low over her ears. Her life was a study in minimalism, not by choice, but by relentless attrition. Every possession had a purpose, a weight, a story. The thick, military surplus coat had been a gift from a veteran who no longer needed it. The small, water-stained journal and a stub of a pencil were her only links to a past where she had been a person with a name that mattered. Now, she was a ghost, a flicker of movement in people's peripheral vision, quickly dismissed and forgotten. Tonight, her world was the few square feet of pavement she patrolled, her movements a slow, rhythmic dance against the cold. The distant wail of sirens was the city's constant soundtrack, a symphony of other people's emergencies that rarely touched her world. She was counting the change in her cup enough for a stale bagel, perhaps when a new scent cut through the familiar odors of rotting garbage and wet asphalt. It was acrid, sweet, and terrifying. Smoke. It wasn't the harmless plume from a restaurant vent, this was thick, black, and carried on a heat that shouldn't exist in the cold alley. Her head snapped up, her senses, honed by years of hypervigilance, pinpointing the source. It was a 4-story brownstone, a relic from a bygone era squeezed between modern office buildings. From a second-floor window, orange flames licked at the frame, painting frantic shadows on the glass. A different kind of scream joined the chorus of the city. Not a siren, but human. High-pitched, raw with terror. It came from the same burning window. Elara saw a small, pale face pressed against the glass, small fists pounding. The image seared itself into her mind, cutting through the protective numbness she had cultivated for survival. People were gathering on the sidewalk now, their phones held aloft, capturing the spectacle. They were an audience to a tragedy, their faces illuminated by the hellish glow. But no one moved toward the building. The fire was a beast, roaring its defiance from the window. Elara's feet were moving before her mind could register the command. The calculus of her own safety, so carefully maintained, was instantly erased by that tiny, trapped face. She was not a hero, she was a conduit, a primal instinct to protect overriding all else. She darted across the street, ignoring the shouts from the crowd. The main door was locked, but a side entrance, leading to a small, fenced-in yard, was ajar. The inside of the building was a throat of heat and smoke, it was a physical wall, choking and blinding. She pulled the collar of her coat over her mouth, her eyes stinging. The staircase was already groaning, the banister hot to the touch. The child's screams were her guide, a beacon in the inferno. She found the door, the heat blasting from it like a furnace. A running kick, fueled by adrenaline and desperation, splintered the lock. The room was an oven. Through the swirling smoke, she saw him, a boy of no more than 5, crouched in a corner, his pajamas soaked with sweat and tears. She scooped him up, his small body trembling against her chest. Flames danced across the ceiling, raining down embers. A beam cracked and crashed behind them, blocking the door. The window was their only way out. Wrapping the boy tightly in her coat, she used a chair to smash the glass. The crowd below gasped in unison. The fall was a 2-story drop onto a patch of grass. It was a risk, but the fire was a certainty. She clutched the child, turned so her back would take the impact, and jumped. The landing was a jarring explosion of pain in her back and legs. The world went white, then fuzzy. But the weight in her arms was safe, coughing, but alive. Strong hands were on her then, pulling the boy from her grasp, draping a blanket over her shoulders. Paramedics appeared, their faces concerned. In the chaotic ballet of flashing lights and shouted orders, Elara did the only thing she knew how to do. She faded. As the attention shifted to the boy, to the firemen battling the blaze, she slipped the blanket from her shoulders, melted into the shadows of the alley, and returned to the only home she had. The pain was a secondary concern to the morning sun did little to warm the deep chill that had settled into Elara's bones. Every muscle protested, a symphony of agony conducted by the previous night's jump. A deep, purple bruise was blossoming across her back, and her ankle was swollen and tender. She had paid a physical price for her intervention, a debt her malnourished body could ill afford. Meanwhile, the city was abuzz with a different kind of energy. The story was on every news channel, in every social media feed: mystery homeless woman saves CEO's son from inferno. The narrative was irresistible. A child, Leo, the only son of Alexander Thorne, the reclusive and notoriously private tech millionaire, had been rescued by an anonymous angel of the streets. A grainy, zoomed-in photo, captured from a bystander's video, showed a blurred figure in a large, dark coat, her face obscured by shadow and grime, jumping from the window with the child clutched to her chest. Alexander Thorne, a man who built empires out of code and data, was confronted with a problem he could not solve with logic or algorithms. His son was alive, shaken but unharmed, thanks to a ghost. The fire, started by a faulty space heater in the nanny's room, had been extinguished, but the emotional scar on his young son was deep. Leo spoke of a lady with kind eyes who smelled of outside and had held him tight as they flew. That was all. For Thorne, it was not enough. A debt of this magnitude, left unpaid, was an imbalance in his universe. He had to find her. His resources, which could track global market trends and pinpoint security threats across continents, were now focused on a single, elusive target. He offered a staggering reward, a sum that could lift a dozen families out of poverty. He had his security team scour every CCTV footage from a 10-block radius. They analyzed the grainy photo, enhancing the coat, the beanie, the posture. They identified her as a woman known to frequent the alleyways near the financial district, a non-entity the local shopkeepers barely registered. Elara, of course, knew nothing of the search. The world of news and rewards existed on phone screens and televisions, realms she could not access. She only knew that her body was broken and the city felt different. The usual rhythm of her day was disrupted. The police, usually content to ignore her, were now more visible. Well-dressed men in sharp, dark suits, their earpieces and stern faces marking them as Thorne's private security, were walking the alleys, showing her picture on their phones. She became a mouse in her own maze, darting deeper into the shadows. She abandoned her usual doorway, finding temporary refuge in the damp confines of a construction site porta-potty, the stench a small price to pay for invisibility. She watched from hiding as the world hunted for her. It was a terrifying inversion. For years, she had craved to be seen, to be acknowledged as human. Now that the spotlight was on her, it felt like a predator's gaze. She saw the reward posters taped to lamp posts. The number of zeros was abstract, meaningless. What it represented was a threat, a disruption of the fragile equilibrium of her existence. That money was a key to a door she had long ago sealed shut. It promised a roof, food, comfort, but it also demanded a return to a world of expectations, of paperwork, of a past she had run from. The anonymity of the streets was a shield, and the world was now trying to rip it away. 3 days after the fire, the hunt had not subsided. If anything, it had intensified. The story had captured the public's imagination, and the pressure on Thorn to find and reward the heroine was immense. For Elara, the constant evasion was taking its toll. Her injured ankle made movement a painful ordeal, and her hiding spots were increasingly precarious and exposed to the elements. Hunger was a sharp, familiar claw in her stomach. It was during a furtive attempt to find food in a dumpster behind a bakery that her world collapsed. 2 of Thorn's security men, methodical and relentless, turned into the alley. There was no escape route. She was cornered. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice not unkind, but firm. "We just want to talk. Mr. Thorn would like to meet you." Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She shook her head, backing away until the rough brick wall scraped against her back. Words, unused for so long, were trapped in her throat. She hugged herself, making her body as small as possible, wishing the bricks would swallow her whole. The security guard spoke softly into his wrist. "We've found her. Alley behind the Daily Bread on 5th. Within minutes, a long, silent black car slid to the curb at the alley's mouth. The door opened and Alexander Thorn stepped out. He was taller than she expected, his presence seeming to suck the sound from the alley. He was dressed not in a suit, but in dark, expensive-looking casual wear, his face edged with a tension that was more than just stress. His eyes, a piercing blue, scanned the scene and landed on her. He walked towards her, his security detail parting for him. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands open at his sides in a gesture of non-threat. "My name is Alexander Thorn," he said, his voice low and steady. "The boy you saved, Leo, is my son." Elara could only stare, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw the raw gratitude in his eyes, mixed with a profound confusion. He was a man used to fixing things, to acquiring solutions, and she was a problem he couldn't quite categorize. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," he continued. "But please, let me try. You're hurt. You're cold. Let me help you. Come with me. Get cleaned up, get some medical attention, some food. No strings. Just, let me say thank you." His words were simple, direct, and utterly terrifying. The offer was a chasm, and she was standing on the edge. To go with him was to step back into the world. But the alternative, staying here, injured, hunted, and cold, was no longer sustainable. Her body was giving out. The will to fight, to remain invisible, was crumbling under the weight of exhaustion and pain. Slowly, hesitantly, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The car ride was a surreal experience. The leather seats were softer than any surface she had touched in years. The warmth was oppressive, the silence deafening. Thorn did not press her with questions, for which she was silently grateful. He simply stared out the window, the city lights reflecting in his pensive eyes. They arrived not at a corporate office, but at his home, a penthouse apartment that seemed to float above the city. It was a monument to minimalist wealth, all clean lines, polished concrete, and floor-to-ceiling glass. The air was still and temperature-controlled, a stark contrast to the living, breathing city below. A kindly, older housekeeper named Maria was summoned. She took one look at Elara, the dirt, the tattered clothes, the fear in her eyes, and her professional demeanor softened into maternal concern. "Come, dear," she said gently, leading Elara away to a bathroom that was larger than her last apartment. The shower was a revelation. The hot water was a miracle that washed away not just years of grime, but layers of defensive crust. She scrubbed until her skin was raw, watching the water at her feet run brown, then grey, then clear. Afterward, clean, soft clothes were waiting for her, simple cotton trousers and a sweater that felt like a cloud. A doctor arrived, discreet and efficient. He tended to her ankle, wrapping it securely, and gave her a mild painkiller for her back. Then, Maria led her to a small, sunlit dining nook where a plate of food awaited: grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, a warm roll. It was simple, wholesome, and it was the most magnificent meal she had ever seen. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, her body trembling with the novelty of being clean, cared for, and safe. Thorne found her there later, staring out at the panoramic view of the city she had just been a part of. He sat opposite her. "The reward," he began, pushing a sleek, black check holder across the table. "It's yours. No conditions." Elara looked at the holder as if it were a venomous snake. She made no move to touch it. "I don't understand," Thorne said, his confusion genuine. "This money, it can give you a new life. An apartment, whatever you need." She finally met his gaze. Her voice, when it came, was a hoarse, unused whisper. "I don't want it." It was the first time he had heard her speak. The refusal, so absolute and illogical to him, left him speechless. He had offered a solution, the ultimate solution in his world, and it had been rejected. The homeless woman who had saved his son was an enigma wrapped in a mystery, and he was no closer to understanding her than when he had found her in that alley. Elara spent the next few days in the penthouse, a ghost in the machine of Thorne's meticulously ordered life. She was given a guest room, but she rarely used the bed, often found sleeping on the floor, the ingrained habit of a hard surface too difficult to break. She was polite, quiet, and utterly detached.